Hello, this is David Hughes of Accounts Easy. What I want to do is just run through a few examples of pivot tables, moving on to the use of filters and slicers in later versions, and finally moving on to the latest Power BI, which has become a separate tool from Excel, but still retains many of the functionality of pivot tables. I've downloaded this sample financial data, and as you can see, it's in dollars, but we'll not worry too much about that. Normally what you would do with a table like this is you would go through a process of making sure that there's no redundant data, and that would mean going through a process of normalization. What that normally means is that you would split this table into several smaller tables. So for instance, instead of having all of these down here, lots and lots of Octobers and Decembers, you just have one table, January to December. Another example, you wouldn't have repeating information in your product, and you wouldn't have repeating information in your country. And all that really does is just make your database more efficient, and that's what they call a relational database. But for the sake of pivot tables, we don't really have to worry about that. Excel can handle data that probably goes to around about say 100,000 lines before it starts getting into trouble. So one thing that is useful to do before actually creating the pivot table is making sure that it's in a table. Now it's grayed out here because it's been already formatted as a table. If it wasn't grayed out, you would click that anywhere in this table, and Excel would recognize that as a table. It just makes it easier for Excel to understand what data to pick up. Okay, so this first video is just going to be a very simple pivot table exercise. So if you see here, pivot tables, insert pivot table, it actually automatically works out what the actual data source is right to the very bottom. You can of course change that, and later on we might look at a way to make a dynamic range. So we'll click a new sheet and we'll click OK, and it's done that because I've came out of the data table. So if we just do that again and click OK, we'll go into the new sheet. Okay, so this is Excel 2016, but what you will find is that there isn't a huge amount of difference between the standard pivot tables from 2007 onwards. Probably the biggest difference from 2007 is the fact that you've got what you have called slicers, and we'll look at those in a wee minute. But for the meantime, we'll just do a couple of very simple pivot tables. Pivot tables are something that people sometimes find a little bit unintuitive, and so they tend to avoid it. But really, it is actually quite straightforward, and what you have to do is to drag these, rather than click the box, which I don't think is a good idea, is drag these into one of these columns or one of these boxes. And if it doesn't look right or if it goes wrong, so what? So what I would say is that first of all, you're looking for something that would be of value, and so the thing that maybe comes to mind is profit. So put that into values. Okay. Now all that does at the minute is very little. It gives us the total sum of the profit. So how do we expand that? Well, it's really how you want to expand it. You've got different options to put into the row. You've got country, you've got product, segment. Put country in to see what happens into rows. Okay, so in other words, whatever you want to see going down the ways, you put into the row box. Okay, and as you can see, it's now expanded, and it's given us a grand total. Okay, now we could have just as easily, if we take that away, we could have dragged in product. Okay, or we could have dragged in, as we said, segment. Okay, but we'll go back to country. Okay, now there is a lot of different pivot tables we can do with this data, but we'll keep it simple at the beginning. Okay, what we might want to do is, we only have sum across here. We might want to have years going across the way. So what we would do is we would slip that into the columns field. Okay, so that unfortunately is only 2 years. Quite often there'd be more, but you will notice that there is these wee drop down arrows. Now we can get rid of those. Basically we would have to go into, let me see, options, display, okay, and click that. It means that you lose the ability to have a filter, but it looks a bit tidier, and you can actually delete that, or you can't, as the case may be. Instead you just put a space. That's just a wee tip if it isn't let you do something. You want those to be centralized. So do that. Now we have the option to either put on grand total or not, and that is done by clicking design, and you've got the option of off for rows and columns or on for rows and columns, etc. We'll keep them on for the minute. We also have the option of formatting. Sometimes you can go a wee bit overboard. such as if I went down to that or to that, it looks a wee bit OTT. So I would suggest finding something that looks good, but maybe doesn't go overboard with losing the visual aspect. You'll also notice that the numbers are not formatted particularly well. All we really have to do is to highlight those. We can format it by right-clicking and format cells, but in this case we'll just click the comma button and we'll just wind that. We don't want pence, so we click this wee button a couple of times, and now we've got it formatted so it's in proper formatting for numbers. And that is a very basic pivot table. What we could also do is, you'll notice that we didn't use a box here called filter. So what would you use in filter? We've used the country in the rows, but say you wanted to filter this pivot table by product. So you drag that into filter and it appears up here, okay, and it gives you the different selections. You click that wee box and that will allow you to select all of them or just one of them, and every time you change it the pivot table will change. And to get everything back, you just double click that. Now, a clever thing with Microsoft 2010 onwards is the use of slicers. So if I get rid of that as a product and go back to insert, and we see a slicer. Now, a slicer is a funny name. If you think of a slicer just as another way of saying filter, so if I click that, okay, it'll give me the option of what slicers or filters we would like. So say we want to have by product. We click product and then click OK, and now we have a slicer that we can arrange right next to it, and it really does the exact same thing as a filter. So if I clicked on the first one, it would only show the product, this product, or if I clicked on that one, or if I held control, I could select two at the one time, or if I clicked that again, it would bring me back to all of them. So pivot tables are not something to be scared of. You see there's a lot of data there. I could have used the discount bands, the units sold. You could have incorporated months instead of years. That might have given you more across. It's just all about experimenting. But that is a basic pivot table. So the next one will maybe develop something that's a wee bit more complex. Thank you.